Thank you all so much. Thank you for that introduction. Chairman Gray, thank you for the invitation to be here. One that we absolutely jumped at. And before I go any further, and though I'm from Texas, there is always something that I wanted to do here in Arkansas. So ladies and gentlemen, let's call those hogs. You ready? Come on up, everybody. Listen, if I were anywhere else in the country, I just would have said good evening. But I know that's how we greet one another here in Arkansas. Really inspired and energized and encouraged by everything that I've heard tonight. All of the great people that I've had the chance to meet in individual conversations here at the convention center. And then just over the course of the day, we had a town hall, the likes of which I would have expected to have in my hometown of El Paso, Texas this morning at the bright and early hour of 8:30 a.m. at Del Campo a la Ciudad. Beautiful store, amazing food, wonderful gentleman who owns the place, who hosted us. And that town hall was conducted almost exclusively in Spanish, talking about every issue that is important to every person. Cada tema, incluyendo migración, pero también cuidado de salud, la economía, el cambio climático, todo que es importante a cada persona adentro de esta comunidad y para este país en este momento tan importante. And I loved it. I love that, as someone earlier said, that the differences do not have to matter, or divide us, or define us, or keep us from doing the great things that we are capable of. Being at that wonderful Moms Demand rally earlier, only you in Arkansas are as crazy as those of us in Texas to stand under that broiling sun and to demand action, and to know full well that we'll be able to get it because you're going to insist on it. That little child that you just talked about, that I had the chance to meet, he's counting on us. And we've got to come through for him, for every generation that follows ours right now. And I feel that here in this hall tonight. I feel that in this community. I feel that across Arkansas. Being with the great people of Conway today, getting to hear what was on their minds. Meeting, I don't know if she's here, but Cynthia Arn from Sharp County, who told me that she bought 12 seats. So I hope she's here tonight. Who invited me to Sharp County. I want to come out and see her and be there in that county. I want to go everywhere. Be with everyone, not write anybody off, not count anybody out. Everyone's important. The only way to demonstrate that is to show that. And the kindness and the warmth with which you've received me and my team, these strangers from El Paso, Texas, has been extraordinary and heartwarming and something I will never forget. Every single one of you, to a person, has told me that you're with us in El Paso. You know that 2 weeks ago to the day, someone walked into a Walmart next to Cielo Vista Mall in my hometown and killed 22 people, human beings, from the United States, from Mexico, from Ciudad Juarez, from Chihuahua City, from El Paso, Texas, in a city that is one of, if not the safest in the United States of America. In an average year, in a population of 700,000 people, there are 18 murders for the year. 2010, there were 5 murders the entire year. You can imagine the devastation that we feel in El Paso right now, and your kindness, your strength, the love that you are sending our way, it is felt, it is received, and we are grateful. And I want to tell you something. Our community, this country, will not be defined by this act of terror. Instead, we will be known for the way in which we overcame it. In El Paso, Texas, at every single blood donation center, lines around the block, under a sun just as hot as the one that we stood under here today. People doing everything they could to contribute everything they had to those who needed it. The trauma doctors, the nurses, the custodial staff at the 2 hospitals that took the victims. When one patient was wheeled out of the trauma bay, they would go in and clean everything down like a NASCAR pit crew to make sure that they were ready to receive the next survivor. The families who've come out to the vigils, to the funerals, to the prayer services, this binational community coming together. And there was a wonderful example of that last night. There's a gentleman who lost his wife. His name's Tony. His wife's name is Margie. I met him at the memorial that had been constructed ad hoc just outside of the Walmart. 22 white crosses, every single one of them a name painted in black on that cross. And Tony was kneeling in front of the cross that bore his wife's name, Margie. And I was introduced to him by a chaplain who had driven down from Alabama to be with our community in our moment of need. And he said, Beto, I want you to come meet somebody. And he had Tony tell me about Margie. And then he asked Tony to stand up and turn around to the crowd of hundreds who had assembled, to the mariachis, to the priests, to the matachines, to everyone from Juarez, Las Cruces, El Paso who had come together. And he had Tony tell the crowd, the community, all of us about Margie's life. And through tears, he did. It was powerful. It was beautiful. It was his testament to her life. And then the chaplain said, all right, everybody, now let's all come around and give Tony a hug. And to a person, everyone there did. Well, this week, published in the El Paso Times, was a notice for Margie's funeral. And in that notice, it said that because Margie and Tony had recently moved to El Paso, because they had no family or no friends in the community, they didn't expect anyone to come to the funeral. So Tony wanted the community to know that if you were interested, you were welcome to join him. So my wife, last night, we're driving from Jackson, Mississippi here to Little Rock, and I get a text from her. And it is a picture. She's in line, and the line wraps around the block many times over. She ended up waiting in that line 4 hours to get into the church, to give Tony a hug. Hundreds, then thousands of people came out from our community to be there with that man right now. That is the best of America, following the worst that can possibly happen to any single one of us. And that's why I still believe so strongly, perhaps more than ever, in this country and in our people and our ability to be good and kind to one another. My hometown of El Paso, Texas, connected with Ciudad Juarez, the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. 3 million. Picture this, speaking 2 languages from 2 countries, 2 histories, 2 cultures, joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater and more powerful than the sum of their parts or the number of people involved. I went to funerals on both sides of the border. The grace with which I was accepted, a complete stranger up until that moment, into those people's lives at their most vulnerable and desperate moment, says something about the character of that community. That's the same community that someone you are very familiar with grew up in. His name is Nolan Richardson. He grew up in the Segundo Barrio, the Second Ward. This is what some people refer to as the Ellis Island for the Americas. Immigrants from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, and points in between and beyond further south first set foot in this country, in that neighborhood. Or maybe we should say Ellis Island is the Segundo Barrio for the rest of the world. But it is defining for us and for this country of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. And that is where Nolan Richardson was raised. Speaking Spanish, speaking English, in a community that was part of Texas, that state part of the former Confederacy, just like yours. The first African American not to have to go to Douglas High School, the all-black high school, because in 1955, thanks to Brown versus Board of Education, he was able to go to Bowie High School. A few years after he graduated, Nolan, as you may know, beyond being a world-class coach, was a world-class athlete, had been playing fast-pitch softball with a city alderman named Bert Williams. Year is 1962. They go to the Oasis restaurant, sit down to order dinner after the game. They won't serve the table because Nolan is black. So Nolan and Bert get up. Bert drives Nolan home. Bert drives himself back to his city council office and writes an ordinance to desegregate places of public accommodation. They pass it in the city council. It is vetoed by the mayor. They have to reconvene the council again and produce a supermajority to override the mayor's veto, and they do, and El Paso becomes the first city in the former Confederacy to do this, highlighted by John Fitzgerald Kennedy that very year as an example to the rest of the country. Now, we give credit to Nolan for what happened here 25 years ago in 1994, the men's NCAA basketball championship. But he had a hand in another one because he enrolled at Texas Western College, now known as the University of Texas at El Paso, or UTEP, under the extraordinary coach, Don Haskins. And Don Haskins was able to recruit Nolan. He was able to recruit Jim Bad News Barnes to come play for his team because he was able to tell them when they said, look, coach, we would love to play for you, but I'm not about to move to a city where I have to sit at the back of the bus, or there's a separate section for me in the movie theater, or I'm treated like a second-class citizen in my very country where I am a citizen. And Haskins could say, you know what? Thanks to Nolan, thanks to Bert, that's not going to be a problem here. And he assembled one of the greatest teams in the history of men's basketball. And in 1966, he put on that court for the championship game in Maryland against the University of Kentucky, the first all-black starting five in the history of basketball, and they won that national title for El Paso and for Texas. So I want you to know that about this connection that we have between El Paso and Arkansas, the leadership that we've seen in our community, but I also want you to know something that has been very painful for me to have to acknowledge and to accept. No matter how extraordinary or exceptional my community might be, no matter how distant we are from the other centers of population and power, and we are a very remote community, we are inextricably connected to the rest of this country, and this country is a very violent country at this moment. The moms know that we'll lose 40,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence this year and every single year going forward until we change course. And as safe as El Paso is, sooner or later, that was going to find us and this country. Though we would like to think otherwise, was founded on racism, has persisted through racism, and is racist today. And if you don't want to accept that phrase or that word or that distinction, look at this. There is 10 times the wealth in white America today than there is in black America. There are 2.3 million people behind bars tonight while we enjoy our freedom, disproportionately comprised of people of color, the largest prison population on the planet, bar none. In a kindergarten classroom, 4 or 5-year-old child of color is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white child in front of the same teacher for the same infraction in the same country today. But this racism, though foundational, literally kidnapping people from West Africa, bringing them here to build the greatness of this country on their backs, and then denying their ancestors the meaningful opportunity to enjoy in the wealth that they had created. For so long, it had flown under the surface, at least for people like me, a white guy from Texas, born every day by those who do not look like me and have had a different experience. But it was only until this administration and this president that racism was invited out into the open. For the last 3 years, there's been a rise in hate crimes in every single one of them. Those counties that hosted a Trump rally in 2016 saw, on average, more than a 200% increase in hate crimes. A president who promised to ban all Muslims, read all people of one religion, from the shores of a country that is comprised of people from the world over, from every walk of life, from every tradition of faith. On the day he signed his executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, was burned to the ground. When he asked people who were born in this country but do not look like the majority to go back, what is he telling the rest of us when he calls Klansmen and Nazis very fine people after they've just chanted, "Jews, you will not replace us"? What is that saying about this country? And when he repeatedly warns of invasions and infestations and calls migrants and asylum seekers animals and predators and killers, and then this May of this year in Florida, one of his big rallies, when he's talking about this invasion and these immigrants who are coming to get us, who, by the way, commit crimes at a far lower rate than anyone born in this country. When he's saying all this, and he says to the crowd, "How are we going to stop them?" Someone yells back, "Shoot them." The crowd roars their approval. The president smiles and he laughs. Well, that violence, that hatred, that racism, that found us. It drove 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso, Texas, and came in to that Walmart. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. None of us can escape the other." And one lesson I take from El Paso is let's embrace that. Let's not tolerate or respect our differences. Let's understand that when we embrace them, they're fundamental to our success, our strength, and our security. And let's make sure that at this moment, this defining moment of truth, this moment of peril in which the president has placed us, in this great democracy, where the government is the people and the people are the government, the responsibility to respond to this is on every single one of us. To connect the dots, as we've just connected them, to understand the consequences and the cost, to make sure that following your lead, we understand that when we pass universal background checks, when we stop the sales of weapons of war like the one used in that Walmart, designed to kill people on a battlefield as effectively, as efficiently as possible, keep it there, keep it out of my community, it does not belong. When we make the case that immigrants are not something to fear, the fact that they chose us, that they left their hometown, their country, their language, their family, to start anew as strangers in a strange land, yes, to do better for themselves and their kids, who among you would not, but also to do better for this country, and by their very presence they have. Let's make sure that that is reflected in the laws that we write them in our own image, to reflect the strong, long tradition of immigrants who are Americans, America, which is a country of immigrants. But let's also go a step further and acknowledge this, that when we as Democrats fail to make progress on the dignity of our fellow Americans, the ability to work a job and be paid a living wage so you don't have to work a second or a third job, the ability to go to a doctor or a healthcare provider. In Texas, the #1 provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. In Texas, the largest inpatient provider of mental health care services is the Harris County Jail in Houston. People with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, getting arrested on purpose in some cases to get care in the one place that it is guaranteed. When we fail to make progress for our fellow Americans, when we alienate them from their own country and from this party, we create fertile ground for demagogues who will play upon their frustration and direct their anger towards minorities and immigrants and people who do not look like the majority of this country. So if ever there were a moment to make progress and to meet this challenge with urgency, it is right now. And I'll tell you this, we cannot just go to the safe places, to Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada, as important as those states are in selecting the next president. We've got to be in Arkansas. We've got to be in Mississippi, where we were yesterday in Camden, where federal agents swooped in, helicopters, guns drawn, hog-tying immigrants for the crime of working some of the toughest, hardest jobs that we have in America today at a chicken processing plant, where some of those whom I met had been working for 15, 18, 20 years, committing no crimes, bothering no one, posing no threat, raising their U.S. citizen children here in this country, contributing to the success of their community. And that fear and that terror that those agents and this president struck into their hearts, that I could see on their faces. 4-month-old child with her father while their mother is in detention. Her breasts swollen, painful, depressed as a person can be. Imagine how you would feel in that situation, knowing not when or if you will see your child, your children, your family, this country again. And tonight there are nearly 400 people in that predicament. Making sure that we tell the rest of the country this story, shock the conscience of America, and force us to act and to do the right thing by them, by us, by our kids, by the generations who will read about us in their history textbooks. When we face this moment of truth, how did we act? Did we look the other way? Did we turn a blind eye? Did we say, thank God that's not me or my family? Or did we stand up to be counted? Did we get after it? Did we help every single person in this country who's contributing to the success of this country? That's what I want to do. Let me say this. I think it's so critical now, more than ever, given how divided and polarized this country is, that we go everywhere, talk to everyone. I'm giving you some examples, but I don't think they should just include Democrats or issues that are important to Democrats or issues that Democrats do well on. With Denise Garner today, I went to a gun show in Conway. And it was interesting. And I learned a lot. And actually, the first person who approached us, and Representative Garner can attest to this, came up and said, hey, I'm a fan. That was the last thing I was expecting to hear at the gun show in Conway. And he invited us to come see his booth. And before we did, I said, listen, I want to be honest with you. Part of the reason that I'm here is because I'm really concerned about gun violence in this country right now. And I want to listen to everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. So I came here to listen to you. What do we got to do? And the guy said, I shouldn't be able to sell guns at this show. Literally. He said, I'm not a federally licensed dealer, and yet I can still sell here. If you're 18 years old and you've got a pulse, I'm going to sell you the gun. I said, that's not right. That guy believes in universal background checks. Another voter there, or a Trump voter as he identified himself, said, listen, I have an assault weapon. Acknowledged, as the chair did earlier, you don't need that to hunt. You don't need that for self-defense in your home. That's a weapon designed for the battlefield. He said, I don't know if it will do any good, but I would be willing to turn that weapon in if that's better for this country. By not writing him off, by giving him a chance to come forward and be part of the solution, I see light at the end of this tunnel. I see an opportunity to build on the lead that Moms Demand have created in this country right now. And I know that that's how Denise and Megan Godfrey won their elections. Democrats who beat Republicans in places that they weren't able to compete, landslide Megan by 30 votes, speaking and listening to people in English and Spanish, counting everybody in. Todos son importantes. And then I saw Denise today walking that gun show, shaking everybody's hand, looking everyone in the eye, letting everyone know that they were welcome, whether or not they voted for her. I think that is so important. And I'll close with this. So many people write our states off. Too red to count. If you're a presidential contender, why would you waste the time? But I learned something the last 2 years in Texas, going to each one of those 254 counties in my state, going not to the reddest counties in Texas, but the reddest counties on planet Earth. So red you can see them glowing from outer space as you orbit the planet. Voted for Donald Trump, in one case 96% in the last election. But I hope you agree with me. Regardless of who they voted for, the party to which they belong, there are fellow Americans and every bit as deserving of being heard and respected and served and represented. And we can't do that if we don't show up first. Going to Archer County, and we're walking into Mern's Cafe for a big town hall that we're going to have there. 12 people showed up. 20 if you include the 8 innocents who were eating breakfast on their own when we walked in. But before I can open the door, this gentleman stops me and he says, "I understand you're Beto O'Rourke. I want to introduce myself. I've lived here my entire life and I want to show you something." And out of a manila envelope, he pulls a black and white photo. And he says, "That skinny guy, third from the left, is my dad. And that guy he's talking to is Congressman Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the year is 1948. LBJ, in his helicopter tour and campaign of Texas, had dropped out of the sky, landed on the Archer County Courthouse lawn, walked over to the American Legion Hall, and was having coffee with this guy's dad and anybody else who wanted to come up to learn from them, to listen to them before he asked for their vote so he would understand them and know how to serve them." And this guy tells me, "My dad lived here his whole life. I've lived here my whole life. You are the first Senate candidate from either party to show up here in 70 years since 1948. And so here's the lesson. At the end of the day, though we did not defeat Senator Cruz, we were down by 2.6 at the end of the game, but we won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of the state of Texas. We won independence for the first time in decades. And check this out, 500,000 Republicans who voted for the Republican governor on one part of the ballot voted for us on the other. And it required us to do nothing less than show up with the courage of our convictions in every single one of those counties. Invite everybody to participate. And a state that had been 50th in voter turnout showed up in record numbers. We turned 2 House seats, helping to flip the House of Representatives. And in Houston, Texas, 17 African American women elected to judicial positions of power, changing the face of criminal justice in our largest and most diverse city in the United States of America. So Arkansas, I want you to know that not only were we able to change our democracy for the better in Texas, not only are those 38 electoral college votes in play for the first time since 1976, and I plan on winning every single one of them, but this state, I'm convinced, is in play as well. I look to Megan, I look to Denise, I look to Chairman Gray, I look to these great state representatives and state senators like Senator Ingram. I know that you have it in you. I can feel it. I sense it. It is like to return to Nolan Richardson. For any of you who played basketball, you know that shot. Before it even left your fingertips, you knew it was going in. I know that Arkansas is going in sooner than later. So Arkansas, thank you for having us out. We will be back. Y les agradezco. Muchas gracias. Y nos vemos. Thank you all very much. Honored to be with you. Thank you.